Morning, everyone. We'll get started in a second. How we doing, Ron, up there? Anybody coming in? All quiet on the front? So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our April Agency Services Bridge Meeting. Hope everyone is enjoying the spring. I think it's spring, right? Right. So we just came down from our coffee and network session hosted by the FRCP up in the Washington room. So if you weren't able to join us, we do it before the bridge meetings from 9 to 10 o'clock. So please join us next time if you were unable to make it this time. Got a few administrative items and a couple of announcements. When we get into the program, just wanted to remind everyone, you can see on this slide, if you are on the webcast and you want to ask questions, you can chat via the YouTube channel, or you can email comments, questions via RM Communications. Okay, I hit the wrong button. Okay. Also in the room, we have microphones on the aisles, and this also applies to folks on the webcast. If you would please identify yourself by name and agency so we can make sure everybody knows where you're from. That would be appreciated. Also want to let you know that at 1 o'clock in the Washington room, we're doing our meet and greet hosted by Appraisal Team 3. So if you are an Appraisal Team 3 agency, please join us back here upstairs at 1 o'clock. We'll also have other representatives from NAR, the FRCP, and other ACR records management operations staff will also be in the room to answer questions or if you just want to get acquainted. So a couple of announcements. First, wanted to let you all know, and an email went out yesterday, that we are opening up the every other year records management satisfaction survey. So you should receive a link. The survey will be open to Friday, May 18th. So I want to encourage you all to log in. Tell us how we're doing. We do use the data to make improvements to the program. And you'll see questions about appraisal and scheduling, about policy, about training, and about a lot of the other core functions that we do in the Office of the Chief Records Officer to support you in your work. So we would really appreciate it if you take a few minutes to log into the survey and send us your comments and your feedback. The other thing I wanted to let you know, and this doesn't affect everyone in the room, but for those of you who received a notice about the upcoming Senior Agency Official for Records Management meeting that was scheduled for May 3rd, we have had to postpone the scheduled meeting. We had a conflict on our end. We need to get the archivist calendar situated so that he will be able to attend, and unfortunately he's unable to attend the May 3rd date. So keep an eye out for an email and a notice to come out probably this week. And we just need to figure out when we will be able to do that over the next 4 to 8 weeks. The last thing to let you all know about is, in case you were wondering, the annual reporting period is now closed. So we are in the process of analyzing the data and posting the reports up online. So I encourage you to go look at what's being posted. And we will come back to you at the next bridge meeting in June to talk about the stats and maybe some preliminary findings from the reporting data that we have collected. So just wanted to let you know about that. The response was very good this year again, so really want to thank you all for sending in your reports. It does get a lot of attention, and we're going to be working over the next month or so in doing the analysis and writing up the annual report. So we'll talk about that a little bit more at the next bridge meeting. So on to the program. Here is the agenda. We're We're going to start with a presentation about the 2019 success criteria that we published in March and is now currently up on the blog and our website. Very happy to have Susan Little here from the U.S. Access Board to talk about what they have implemented at the Access Board to manage their electronic records. Gary Ralphus, our Records Management Training Director, is here to talk about new changes in records management training. John McAvoy is joining us to talk about the ARCIS Customer Portal Disposal Module rolling out. And then we will conclude. So we have quite a bit to cover today. So without any further delay, I am going to turn it over to Kyle Douglas and fellow Philadelphia 76ers fan to talk about the 2019 success criteria.
Thank you, Lawrence. Good morning, everyone. All right, so again, my name is Kyle Douglas. I'm an electronic records policy analyst. And today I'll be talking to you about the 2019 success criteria. The success criteria was generated as in response to the Managing Government Records Directive for agencies to manage electronic records electronically to the fullest extent possible for eventual transfer to the National Archives. So the policy, as Lawrence mentioned, has been published. It's been published since the 19th of March, and it's on our White Papers and Reports website. You can also locate it on our Records Express blog. The success criteria applies to temporary records, but primarily addresses requirements for permanent electronic records. It has three key components. The components are a high-level view, where four areas agencies must focus on: operational activities that describes the basic tasks agencies should accomplish, universal ERM requirements, electronic records management requirements, which recast business and system requirements, and an appendix that includes an ERM maturity model example question. What you see here is our wheel. And before I get into that, let's finish off in the high-level view, which is the first area. The high-level view describes the four areas agencies need to strategically focus on for managing permanent electronic records. Agencies must have policies in place that manage records, that talks about how agencies need to manage them, and it also must have systems to manage those records and execute the policies. Agencies must have the ability to provide access to the records and dispose of them. The success criteria also includes statements for each of those areas that talks about the nirvana state, or what success criteria needs to look like for each of those areas. The operational activities section describes the tasks agencies should be accomplishing to electronically manage permanent electronic records by the 2019 target. The activities in the area are fundamental and should be conducted routinely and repeated as necessary. The order and number of times depends on that you need to repeat the steps, depends on the maturity of your agency. So in this wheel, it has multiple areas to focus on, and I'm going to highlight some of the areas that agencies need to focus on. They should prioritize and allocate resources. Agency managers must ensure sufficient budgetary resources are available and prioritized for managing permanent electronic records to include people, processes, and tools. Another area is the training of records management staff. Agency managers must designate and train those staff, including records officers, records custodians, and other agency liaisons. In each of these areas that I'm reading off, I won't read them all, but each of them have a subset of tasks in them at great depth that you all can review when you go out to the website. Okay, on the next slide, it depicts our universal ERM requirements, which is a product of our Federal Electronic Records Modernization Initiative. Again, it casts the business and system requirements that agencies must include or should consider. And then also the success criteria document, as you will see it when you visit the website, includes an example maturity model question. The question demonstrates how the future model will be structured, as well as how agencies can use the criteria to measure their success using a 0 to 5 scale. And I think that is all. Are there any questions? I know I went through that kind of fast. Any questions? Anything on the phone? Chat? All right. Well, if you have any questions, feel free to email me at eric.douglas@nara.gov. Thank you. Next up is Susan Little.
Thanks, Kyle. So, many of you probably heard me say before that one of the things that I have really wanted to do for many years as part of the BRIDG meeting is to have less NARA talking and some other agencies talking. One of the challenges that I know every agency faces is NARA issues requirements, but it's really the agencies that are implementing those requirements. And unfortunately, here at the National Archives, we write policy that needs to apply to all agencies, whether you're a micro agency like the U.S. Access Board or the Department of Defense. So the challenges are on that road to implementation where we really need agencies to be able to share, talk to each other, and I've always hoped that we could have, as part of our BRIDG forum, because there will always be a need for NARA talking, to share some of those best practices and lessons learned. So I'm very excited today that when I confronted Susan Little with the invitation to come talk to BRIDG about what is going on at the U.S. Access Board in terms of implementing their ERMS, that she said, okay, sure, yeah, be happy to do it. So with that, I'm going to bring Susan up here, and Susan is the Chief Information Officer of the U.S. Access Board, and she's going to talk to us about her path to the ERMS solution.
Hey, good morning. Just want to start off and talk to you about the Access Board briefly. And let me see here. So as Lawrence mentioned, our agency is a very, very small one. We're a micro agency. And so I wanted to give you an overview of how small we were. And you can see we only have 28 staff. And talk a bit about our path to working on the 2016, 2019, and our anticipation of 2022 with NARA's policy, and talk to you about how we implement. I think some of our implementation practices are going to be useful across the board, and not just for a micro agency, but probably for any size agency. So what my agency does, a lot of times people don't know we're federal, which in some cases is very good for us, but we actually issue rulemaking on disability-related regulations. As you can see, Americans with Disabilities Act, Telecom Act, Rehab Act. We are the ones who write Section 508 as well, which applies to federal information technology. So this is really our core, our mission, our agency's work. Now, in terms of 2018, our goal in our very small records team, and I have to say that I've been very fortunate in the work that we do, that we have staff as well as contractors who are very stubborn, very motivated, and they want to succeed. And so with that, we have tried to meet the M1218. And we are, let's go here, goal 1 we've looked at, goal 2. Yeah, let's see here. How do we try to implement our programs? We've been fortunate to have senior agency official backing. My previous SAO very much supported our records program, and we were able to leverage that support in our other areas. My having multiple hats in the agency in terms of our governance, I was able to leverage the CIO shop as well as the record shop as well as our contract process for budget to actually have contracts in place, to work on a records management application, and to actually put together a position description for a records information management specialist and bring that person in to do that work. Our program really then is reflected in our records management handbook. The directives that are signed and the policies that are signed by our executive director, and our records management handbook is really kind of a living document that we use for all of our records practices in the agency. So how did we kind of get from day one to where we are today? So this is really a timeline and how it's helped us modernize and how we kind of have looked at the past and kind of looking at, where we're going with the M1218. We were able to leverage legal support. Our general counsel's office helped us put together the first records management contracts because, frankly, my agency had only GRS schedules, and we had one NARA approved schedule for our mission critical work. And when we started looking into this, after we were putting our jaw back up into the part of our face, we said we have to deal with this. So the first thing that we had to do was deal with a contract to actually design a records management application. So that was something that we took on without really having an understanding of how we were going to put together the database piece with the record schedule piece. And we had a kind of our beta model that was used briefly. The complaint tracking system was part of that initial priority to put together our records system because the complaint tracking system was the only record schedule we had in place at that time that wasn't a GRS schedule. So that was our goal to kind of work through that. Again, we've used all of our directives, put them in the records handbook, and that was how we basically made changes, turned it into the handbook, used the handbook, put it out to the staff. Try to keep it very simple. Other agencies, in terms of their implementation, are going to have a much more complicated way to do this. What we really tried to do was really understand our culture and understand our agency's processes to know what would work for us. And in terms of NARA's requirements, understandably that NARA wants to have a prospective requirement for you to meet the compliance with their directives instead of a prescriptive one. But the difficulty then for all of us at federal agencies is, well, how do we do this? How do we do this? How do we make it work? You just don't hire a consultant to make it work. You just don't buy a COTS software to make it work. You have to really understand what will work within your agency. And frankly, because we're all records officers, we may have access to a business impact analysis to see who is doing what in the agency, and that'll help us understand our culture to know how to move things forward from a records point of view. So let's see. The agency email survey. So from 2013 to 2014, we did a survey to find out what we had, who was getting email out, what was considered email that was agency specific, what our email policies were, what was coming in that wasn't official. In terms of looking at the data, looking at testing of our email, we basically found out that we had about 40% of the email coming in was like non-records transient material. And we didn't want to collect it. We didn't want to collect it for a number of reasons. We didn't want to collect it because then we have to pay for storage of it through some other hosted provider. And also we felt that, junk in, junk out, we wanted to really vouch for the integrity of the records data, in this case, in the email system. So 2015, next thing. We actually spent a long time developing the email implementation. And I'll talk more about that in some of my other slides coming up. From 2015 to 2016, again, we're big on surveys to our staff. What are people doing? We really need to understand the universe of what we have to know then how we're going to categorize it, how we're going to contain it, what kind of system we're going to put it in. 2016, we moved forward with email implementation. And now, and last year through today, we're looking at file structure for the file plan alignment, for a SharePoint site development, which is going to be the front end of our electronic record system. And we're in the middle of metadata and metadata rules. So let me kind of click through here to kind of move this through. So assessments, we had to do an assessment to understand the business processes. What about paper versus electronic? We really felt at my agency, day forward would be electronic. Paper is as paper is. If it's created in paper, it stays in paper. And we have parallel processes to deal with both of those for implementation. We've also worked to develop new records disposition schedules. We've tried to really apply as broadly as possible the NARA guidance to bucket categories. We've done that because we have to think of how can we maintain the information? How can we vouch that the information is credible and correct? And if we use a larger bucket, then we can manage that bucket better. We don't have the resources in terms of staffing or budget to be able to really go into smaller buckets for some of our schedules. So the file plan. So we seem to have like a parallel process. We're always looking at all the records guidance coming out of NARA, and looking at that and looking at our records file plan schedules, and then thinking to ourselves, well, okay, how are we going to use this internally with new electronic documents that are being developed? But parallel to that, when we're having our conversations in the office, we're also looking at, well, how do we take these file plan, the schedules, and how do we then take those and make them into a database? How do we take them to work through to our, in our 2016 with our email, and the 2019 where we're building our electronic document system. So where we are with that now is really looking at risk analysis. How are we looking at the documents coming in? How can we vouch that the documents are actually in their schedules, we're capturing the metadata correctly, and what are we doing, to measure those things? One example I would give for our email is that we would have to run a query on our Outlook 365 to see what kind of data is coming in an email, and then having a report run on our records management system for the same kind of time frame, and kind of do a comparison in parallel of those to really see what we're capturing in our records system for email in this particular case. Is it the data that we think we should be capturing based on the universe of what's coming in the 365? So now, let's see, I'd like to transition here. Our records management application is something that we're all building, but we're records officers, but we're really building an IT system to hold our records data. That's not always the easiest thing to do. It's not so easy just to hire a consultant and say, we've checked the box, we can meet the NARA compliance for this. Our records application is something that was a legacy document that was custom designed for us, legacy system. And it really is something that our staff have been involved in over multiple years with our contractors to develop the file plans, the record series, the disposition. So, and as Kyle mentioned, when he was talking about policies, he was talking about the planning, and he was also talking about the maturity model. I thought about it, I was driving in this morning on 50, and I thought, well, the maturity model is really going to be different depending on which federal agency you come from, and it's really going to relate to the resources you have available. I'm thinking with the system that we are building now and that we're in right now for the 2019 with the electronic records, is that we're shooting for good enough. We're taking advantage of other strategic initiatives. As a CIO, I'm aware of all the IT initiatives in the agency. I know that our SharePoint initiative to have a shared document resource was something that our records team could take advantage of. So hooking onto that as something. I also know that in terms of the cybersecurity work we're doing, that the high-value assets that the agency has are our records, and certain records that we have within our record system. So that gives us the green light, the go-ahead, to keep things moving. All right, so what do we have here? Our record file plan categories. So these are examples of some of the screens that we use when we're developing our program management files. And this is the kind of interface our team is looking at. So the screen in the front is the one that our records team would be looking at, and the column in the back right lists a number of different schedules that our agency deals with. And each one of those we would then manually work through for the management of the data in that. Okay. So with regard to the queries, the hardest thing about developing the 2019 requirements are that the records people, in terms of being good enough, in terms of meeting the requirements, we are actually working on the queries in the system. We're not just even looking at paper in files anymore. And so our group that's working on this is really comprised of a couple IT people who are really working with us on the kind of rules involved. With this system, we have to understand something called Boolean logic, which I personally don't understand. I deal with it. None of us understand except one of our consultants, and we have to live with this. And this gets us through to the day. This is the how we basically make our documents go into certain records schedules. So we've talked about email categorization, the auto categorization. We haven't really talked about role-based. So the role-based, which is the capstone-like approach, is something that we've done with our 2016 email auto-categorization. We've really tried to put in the capstone officials in my agency, which in our case are 2 or 3, 10% of our agency's staff. For much larger agencies, you're going to be looking at a much more complex way of determining who those officials are. I've already talked about the records management approach, the non-permanent records. Again, we're putting them in our NAR-approved email retention schedules. So let's go with this one. I'm going to show you how we do what we do. Let me just put all these on the screen here. So yeah, you wouldn't think this is records management, but it's the life we live. So on the left side of the screen, we use Office 365. We've got Outlook in the cloud. Everything comes in, and we capture it in journaling. We copy it. We don't move it. We copy it. We have another issue, parallel IT issue, of what do we do with the stuff that's still in 365. I'm not going to address that today, but that's an ongoing issue for our agency in terms of best practice. What do we do with that? So for the records perspective, we copy it, we move it. The file cabinet, the virtual file cabinet, which is kind of the center of the screen, and the auto-categorizer are really the most difficult thing. And I'm mentioning this with email because we're finding that we're using the same kind of model in 2019 when we're talking about our electronic records application. You still have to use your records file plans. You still have to know how to capture the documents and use the file plans and use the metadata from the file plans to actually move the documents into your record system. So the categorization really just moves all of our documents into certain records file plan schedules that are listed in our cloud hosted site. The cross-user PNR screen, we've basically decided that we don't want to have the transient documents, and we don't want to have the non-record material in. And so, for example, in my office, probably like yours, people subscribe to WMATA, to see, are certain metro lines delayed. We've put that in a cross-user, kind of a whitelist, and pulled those things out. We also have a user-specific PNR. So the user-specific, our IT policies allow people to have de minimis use of government email for personal things. For example, with mine, my children are in Fairfax County Public Schools, so I would have that one as one of my email addresses that comes in, and that's kind of my weed whitelist that comes out of our system, because those things are just not going to be permanent records material, even temporary, they're transient. So this is how our system works. Let's see here. Okay. And this is an example of the auto-categorization. So again, you take a look. Our record schedules, we have some of them listed there. Program management files, our rulemaking, our FACA committees. These are things that when you buy a system, when you design a system, buying a system off the shelf is not going to have you have success with the NARA requirements. You must spend this time. And this is ugly time. Very ugly time for staff. when you have to divide your time. You can't half listen to a conference call. You can't put them on mute and do something else at this time because your contractors, your consultants do not understand your business model. One example we always use in my office is that, again, we do rulemaking on disability-related issues, and one of the consultants came in and said, oh, this is a transient thing. It is Princess Cruise Lines. And I said to them, no, actually, we have a political appointed board member who's with Princess Cruise Lines, and we do rulemaking, and they are one of the stakeholders in our regulatory committees. So that is the kind of information only the people in the government, only the mission people, only the people who are responsible for this can input. You cannot have a system that works unless you're willing to put in the time for this. And this is the point where good enough doesn't apply. This has got to be really good. This is the really good, because if you don't do this, you do not match your record schedules. So, all right, 2019. We really are trying to leverage what is existing in the agency, trying to have records kind of hook into it and move forward. Day forward migration. So our thought is system is in place, X day, all of that's day forward, all of the record schedule implementation will apply. Then we have the issue of legacy. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. It's a very different issue. So day forward, we know we succeeded with our email because we kept the end user out. The last thing we wanted were staff people to go in and have the ability of randomly doing things that would not keep the integrity in the records data. So we thought with that model, let's try doing that on our records management for 2019. Let's try to keep the end user out as much as possible. Let's try to lock the end user down because we don't have the staff to go in and check behind all of their selection of metadata for their documents. So we're building all the metadata on the back end of this system. And we have a crosswalk lookup table, which was a huge feat that one of the crucial members of our records team developed. And basically, the lookup table is like one huge lookup table on one side of our record system and a parallel lookup table on the SharePoint side that connects metadata fields from one table to metadata fields on the other through a connector tool. So, talked about the SharePoint design, which is the front end, how we're going to be adding metadata to new documents. The question is, what do we do with legacy? You know, how do we deal with the legacy information? We have a tool that we're working with called Active Navigation to only look at the universe of all our electronic data in my agency. The data goes back to like 1986. So then the question is, okay, how much data do we have? What kind of data do we have? And in our preliminary searches, we found that 54% of it is duplicate. We don't want that. We don't want it. We don't have staff to deal with it. We don't want to move it. It's dirty data. You know, I only want the permanent records. That's my focus. Drive for permanent records. So how do we find it? So we know, going back to the record schedule, what our permanent schedules are. And I can sort by different fields in this tool to get those record schedule documents, but there might be things I'm missing. So we sat in our records group and we talked about it, and another person involved in our records work is our CTO, who's an amazing technical person, and without his assistance, we certainly wouldn't be half as far as we are now. But I said, how are we going to get the stuff that the previous directors put out, my capstone officials? How are we going to get to it? So we're actually able to do queries and sort by individual who modified a document or individual who created, to get a capstone-like approach as one kind of search to get the legacy documents, and put that information into our process for moving the data. Temporary, yes, we have temporary series, but right now, good enough is I know it's there, but I can't focus on good enough right now. The temporary has got to be something we look at after we move and test the permanent information. So how do we do this? Yeah, you can see we're big on diagrams, Yeah, this only gets so exciting. So you have to have color and charts. And the SharePoint project we're building, I see on the left side, is basically going to be a new kind of shared work environment for the staff, which is a culture change in itself because a lot of our managers don't know what SharePoint is, haven't used SharePoint, don't know how you use it, and don't know why we would want to use it. So that's like records is in the mix in this whole culture change. Our staff, the only interaction our end users are going to have is when they create a new document or they upload a document, they're going to have to add metadata, minimally so. They're going to have to add metadata. And we have figured out that in testing, they're not going to be allowed to drag and drop documents because if you do that, we cannot capture the metadata, so we're going to lock them out of that process. We're trying to not allow the end user to do anything that would inadvertently prevent the records from being captured. So we have a connector tool that is on the back end between the SharePoint site and our records management application that is basically using both of all the entries in the two lookup tables to then move the documents on the behind the scenes so the staff don't even are not involved in it. They don't know what's happening. And in theory, it will be something that will work well. So here's an example of our SharePoint site. Very straightforward. Our groups of people who work together, our administrative group, we have a board, records, guidelines and standards, technical or legal. It's just basically what we're going to show them. Here's just an example of some of the files that we'll be having with our out-of-town meetings, our public affairs, our next board meeting. Just get through here. Okay, the metadata. So the two lookup tables have a connector tool that basically looks for certain key terms and then moves it. When we first tested this, we found out that the connector tool was so fast that it was possible if someone just opened a document, the connector tool could just pull it without any metadata. And so we didn't want that. We had to slow it down and add like parameters for the connector tool so it waited until the metadata was added. We said to the contracting group, well, what do we do when something is wrong? How do we test this? How do we have quality control? How do we have our audit? What's our auditability here? And so if there's an anomaly, for example, in some of the metadata that would be added, and the two connector tables they're not in sync, then the document would be put in a separate area that would be flagged by an email for our records management team to look at. Because we really wanted to have a process in place so that we had control of the integrity of the documents. So this screen shows, let's see, on the left-hand side, we are looking at, let me just see here. So we've got some of our documents that you see in I believe in our SharePoint site on the left. The connector tool is something that you see the gray square in the center that is basically matching what is on the left to the tables that you see in the upper right side. And that's how the pieces work together with the workflow that we're establishing for the kind of work we do to move things where they need to go. So challenges. Challenges we have are that everyone has multiple roles. Difficult to get things done because we're pulled into multiple directions. Good enough is okay, though. So even with the multiple directions, we are trying to say this is what we can do, this is how we can implement, and the way we're going to implement will be something that over time we will fix, over time we will edit, over time we will improve. And so when we go live, which we anticipate going live in a SharePoint site in hopefully a month or two, I'm thinking for the records piece it might be 75%, 80%. It's not 100%. So what we have in place is as soon as we go live, then our records team is going to collect the data, run reports, find out the pieces and the gap analysis we have to determine how we can improve the system. Since we use contractor services, then in our next fiscal year, when we put out a second contract, we're going to use those, the reports and the data we gather from that perspective to add to the requirements of the contract to have them help us improve the system over time. And we're fine with that. That works for us. It's a good way to get things done, and it helps us move to 2019. It gives us time to meet 2019. So along with our moving to things, we're also redefining internal procedures. What is beneficial to us is that our role for our record system is really in the IT shop, and it's very helpful because we can leverage all the IT policies that our agency is putting out, and we can use those to benefit our record system that we're building, which is an electronic database system. Working with the General Counsel's Office and their initiative looking at PII and looking at the kind of data and the information we're collecting can leverage the General Counsel's Office in terms of moving forward with the PII, looking at security levels for that kind of data. Let's see, 508 compliance. So my office writes Section 508, and our policy is to exceed what we tell other feds to do. Up to this point in the program that I'm responsible for, we have had internal stakeholders, so our end users, with regard to our training, with regard to any kind of extra learning experience. We've made sure that the kinds of presentations and documentation are accessible in multiple formats. In terms of the system we're creating, the piece that the end users touch, which is the end user probable non-record screen, our contractor designed it to make sure that it could be used with screen readers and not have any technical issues to have someone enter that data. So that's what we have. That's kind of where we are. So any questions? Thank you.
Hey, Susan, I have a couple questions from online.
Sure.
So the first one's from Tommy Lee. He's the records officer of the Air Force. And you kind of touched on this a little bit, but are electronic records with PII information stored on the Access Board's SharePoint site?
Tommy, this is my CTO talking to me. We're trying not to do this. What we're trying to do, in part, we're trying to keep the PII, if we have to have it, in SharePoint, so we inherit the security controls from the cloud. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to develop a poem right now to get PII off of the network, which we found the PII with the active navigation tool. That was one of the things we did.
So he kind of followed up a little bit and said that if you are doing that, he said that is data at rest encryption applied per the revised OMB circular A130 to mitigate PII breaches?
So our general counsel's office is really taking the lead on the PII. I'm not the privacy official. We are working with them to develop their privacy program. I am certain that they are trying to mitigate how that is being done in our office. We're not there yet, though. Okay. So just a comment. Chris Baker from the White House Communications Agency, WICA, he said that SharePoint is an approved PII repository for data at rest if the appropriate encryption is applied to the application, and by that he means AES with a key of 256. And then Tommy came back and said that that might be a cost issue. You know, and it may be, and this is where my role and the CTO's role are slightly different. I know that in our Microsoft licensing, we've moved to the E5 level, which by doing so with all of our licensing, including our SharePoint, which is all cloud-based, we inherit additional security requirements per that licensing structure. Now, with regard to the specific controls we put in place for PII, I don't have those specific answers at this time. It's something we could certainly follow up offline, and I could involve our CTO in. But obviously, PII is a huge issue. I think these questions are very good because it really shows how records and it's really information management that we're all doing. We're in this huge transition for records. We're looking at information. The government has huge information requirements now, and we are at the center of this and need to be really communicating with the IT shop, the legal shop, the privacy official for this.
Tommy says thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Susan. So I will just throw out a plug for anyone out there who is working through the challenges of 2019 or the 2022 digitization goal. If you are in the planning stages or early implementation, please reach out to me or the team. We would love to have you share some of your experiences. I think others, as Tommy noted, would appreciate it as well. So our next presentation, Gary Ralphus, who's director of our Records Management Training Program, is going to talk about some new strategic changes to what we are doing with records management training at the National Archives. Gary?
Good morning, everyone. So 2 topics today. I want to give you a little update on where we are with the work we've been doing with the new curriculum, give you some status on some things we've done, ask you to participate along the way in things coming up over the next 3 to 6 months. And then we're also going to talk about the long term. So the curriculum takes us out roughly about another year to get that rolled out. What's going to happen after that? And so we've been thinking a lot about NARA's strategic plan and other changes that we think will benefit the community and how we deliver training over time to you. So first, the curriculum. As a reminder, if you haven't seen it before, some of you may be new, one of the things we've really focused on in this work is trying to get to differentiate who gets what instruction in the future. Rather than everybody coming through the KA series, and some of it may be being too over the top for them in their role, some of it may be too simple. So we've set up these 3 levels, trying to identify what are typically the structure in agencies where you have custodians doing that day-to-day work with the records in an office. Your liaisons are often folks that are a middle person between your records officer and the custodian, either looking at a series of offices or maybe a field location or a geographic region where they're kind of the middle person doing that work. And then also that top tier, the agency records officer, who's setting policy, running the program, and doing that strategic level work for your agency and records. So we've made a lot of progress. In March, we did our first pilot of the first course in the first level. So we're getting things rolling. Next one is targeted right now for late May. And so again, we're making progress on that. The second level, we've finished design and are in the process of getting all that built. So that will be finished up, we hope, this fiscal year also. So we're looking at level 1, level 2, hopefully both of those being complete by the end of this fiscal year. As we get these done, we're going to largely do pilots of them. And then we'll look at, in 2019, where we can fit maybe rolling some of them into our training calendar as we move forward. But probably it won't be till the back half of 2019 where you start to see some of these courses pop up on a regular basis for people to take them. And then last, with the third tier, we have made progress there also. So we are starting the analysis for that right now. A number of you, I appreciate it, have volunteered to help us with that. So we'll be setting up interviews to listen to you. How do you do some of these tasks that a records officer does? So for example, how do you build a strategic plan for your records management program? What needs to be in it? How do you figure out your staffing levels and articulate the responsibilities of the staff in your agency at the different levels of the records management program? Those are the kind of things that we want to hear how you're doing it. From that, we'll build kind of a model of each of these tasks. No single way is going to work for everybody, but we'll build a way that we believe to be successful that serves as the basis for building the training on all that. So again, with the third level, we're underway with the analysis. We anticipate, again, all of that being done by October of 19. So the goal for us is to have all 3 levels ready to roll out the door in October of 2019 and begin working with them And then we'll transition fully out of the KAs as we head to 2020. So we'll have a year of trying to run some of these side by side and see how things go. So with that, I also wanted to just give you a little bit of a shout out to the folks that were in our last pilot. So from the Office of Trust Records in the Department of the Interior, Veterans Affairs, Southwestern Power Association, Department of Labor, USDA, thank you all for the folks that participated. Again, we've got others coming up, so if it's you or other folks that you want to have involved in seeing what's coming, we'd love to have you. You can email us at rmt1@nara.gov or email me. You'll see my contact information on the last slide. It's critical for us to get your feedback as we're building so that we understand how is it fit for you. This last pilot we did was rather unique. We had the Department of Labor Records officer in there, right? And of course, that's built for custodians, as well as folks that were brand new. So we got a good sense of, hey, if you've never done this before, does this course help you like we anticipate it will, all the way up to somebody that's been doing it a long time going, you know what, this is really good, but here it would have helped if you had done this a little differently. So that mix is helpful for us in feedback as we run these pilots. And again, to look forward to you helping us along the way with that. Just a few screenshots of, well, what's this course look like, right? So it is a mix. We'll have some stuff that's self-paced. We also have webinars that will be part of those courses. So the students are not just abandoned, right? We have instructors that will get online, still do training with them, make sure that we're giving them feedback on their practice and answering questions along the way. We've built all this to try to be in, if you will, micro bite size, right? So if you think about this online learning experience, the last thing that any of us want to do is sit for hours in front of a computer doing this extended training thing. But if I can go in and say, okay, in 15 minutes, I can take care of these 2 things in my curriculum and come back tomorrow and take the next 2 on in another 15, 20 minutes, it starts to fit for the model of work of I'm going to training, but still doing my job at the same time. It's not a big interruption in terms of what you're going to do. And then we've also been very conscious about what are the kinds of things we want to give you, right? Not everything in online learning has to be these self-paced e-learning modules that feel like mandatory training. Sometimes reading is still a great thing, right? So we've looked at each of these materials and said, what's the best way to help somebody learn the content in this particular format? Most importantly, we've tried to make sure there's an ample amount of practice for everything that's being learned. In some cases, that practice might be in the computer with what we've done. Other cases, we're asking you to go back to your agency and do something. So for example, when you learn about inventories, we're probably going to send you back to your office. You pick a file drawer or a set of folders, do the inventory, come back into our system in our social network area in the discussion threads, post your inventory. Let's see what you got. You did it for real. Now we can give you feedback on it. And also your peers can see, wait a second, I've got stuff like that too. Maybe I didn't get the same description or I missed something in mine. So again, trying to make sure that we do this the best we can as we move things online. So let me pause there. Any questions about the curriculum, where we're at, or ways that you can get involved with it? Jim, anything online? Okay. So that's the easy part. Now the question is, what's coming next? Like all of you, we're in a stage of change in the agency, right? We've got our new strategic plan that's come out. Now in the training program, we're trying to take that in and say, what does that mean for us? We know there's the digitization coming. There's a lot of changes. How do we best support you and our agency as we go down this road? So in doing that work, we've been trying to think about what are the things that are either constraints or opportunities going forward as we go forward. So one of the constraints we know is our fiscal environment. The cost of training is a barrier for a lot of agencies, particularly smaller ones where you don't have a large budget, right? So that's something we hear a lot is, I would love to get more training, but we don't have the money to do it. So it's a consideration for us as a constraint about how do we move forward and either fix that for you or at least not make it worse. The next one becomes travel. If you're in Washington, D.C., you come to College Park, life is pretty easy for your staff. Around the rest of the country, it's pretty difficult. We've done our best over the last few years to try to figure out where are the best places around the nation to offer training. How can we work with you to even get our trainers to your location around the country? But it's still pretty hit and miss, right? And we know travel for folks is a challenge along with the money that goes with it. When we look at the opportunities, one of the things that we're really thinking a lot about is how do we get training to more people? In fiscal year 16, we trained about 6,200 people. That was a pretty dramatic increase. We average about 4,000 a year. We would like to see that number be far greater, but we also understand that we've got to do things differently to achieve that. Historically, you look at what we've been doing, it's about that 4,000 number, but that may not be enough for us to actually reach all the folks that need to learn about doing records management. Another area where we see an opportunity is we're not the quickest to respond in the training program. As you've been hearing me for a couple of years talk about the new curriculum, it's a pretty big intensive process for us to build new stuff. And we certainly recognize going forward that the pace of change is going to increase, particularly around what happens with electronic records management. We've got to figure out how do we become more responsive to you, get your input along the way, and make sure that we're delivering training content in a more timely way to you. So an example would be the email crisis a few years ago. We weren't in a position to spin something up and go, okay, we've got this problem. In 2 months, we're going to crank out some training that all of you can take back to your agencies and use it. That's what we want to build towards so that as we see things in the environment that require training, we are better positioned to help you with that and meet that goal. And then the last one is we started this roughly 3 years ago with all the analysis we did with you to say, what are the tasks that you all are doing with records management? And bring that back and use that as part of the foundation for what we're building in training. We see that as part of the challenge going forward also. A great opportunity with these changes we're thinking about is how do we take more of the driver of what we build from you? Rather than just saying, what is NARA doing? We know we're going to publish new policies, that'll drive some changes, but what are your other needs that we could potentially help fulfill for training your workforce that we're not doing right now? So for us, these are the things that are in our head thinking about what is the next iteration of what we do in training and how do we essentially get these things changed. So here we go. Some pretty big news coming. Here's our first change. As we go forward, training will be free. I'll get into a timeline at the back of this so you can start to see where some of this plays out. But that's our first big one. Can we get rid of the cost barrier for you? The answer is yes. So we are committed to making that change. One of the ways we're going to deal with that is we're only going to do training online in the future. It eliminates the geographic problem and it eliminates all the costs associated with doing face-to-face training. And we're very, very confident that we can deliver the same level of experience, the same quality of learning in the online environment. A lot of the work that we've done over the last 12 to 18 months, particularly in these pilots, has proven to us that we can be just as effective online as we are in a face-to-face classroom. We have to make sure we make good design decisions doing that to get it right, but it can be just as effective. And what we know from the science, when you look at all the research data from the learning community, where you are when you learn doesn't matter. It's the instructional strategies that are applied. So whether it's online or face-to-face, if you use the same instructional strategy, people will learn essentially the exact same amount from it. So the medium that we deliver in is not important. The other thing we're going to do is focus less on formal courses. So as we go forward, we're going to worry about tracking training for agency records officers that are designated by their SAOs. All the other training we're going to do, we're not going to worry about who completes it. That, again, helps us with that cost barrier. So if I don't have to worry about all the infrastructure that goes into knowing who did something, then I can do a lot more other things with those resources, right? So we'll make that adjustment as we go down the road. Another way to get past this is we've heard for many years, often people come to training, request copies of materials, and we've been a little bit reluctant often to give them out, right? We have to protect our business model, and then we also have always had concerns about how are they going to be used. In fact, I had one last week. Somebody was in training, after sitting in training for 3 days, said, you know what, I'm going to go back and teach my agency this. Our assessment was you've reached kind of a novice understanding after 3 days of training. Could you call us in 3 or 4 months after you've done some of this? And now let's see, are you positioned to train it, right? That raises its own set of concerns that I'll talk about in a little bit. We got to this idea of rapid development, right? So we will create a capacity for ourselves of how do we do that. And here's the big point with that issue of how do you use the materials. We can't just give you stuff and think that you're going to figure out it on your own, particularly when folks just come to training, then they go back and think they're going to do it all on their own. They may not have training experience. They may not fully understand what they got in the training yet. So we've got to create a support capability for you. As we see some of this training shifting more towards your end, where you're doing it more in your agency rather than coming to us, we want to be there to help you do that, whether that's calling a trainer to get advice about how to do a particular exercise, or calling us and going, wait a second, I see these 3 things in the training catalog that I can use, but I'm not sure how to best fit them together. Here's what my audience needs to learn. What do I use? So again, think about how do we support you as we go through these changes. So a lot to digest, a lot coming. For us, this is how we currently think about our resources, right? We have put a lot of emphasis on training delivery. That's where a lot of our time and effort is spent. That's not what we're going to do going forward. We're going to shift this paradigm where we take our time and invest it in giving you the things to use. So we're going to adapt to be much more responsive and much more focused on building things, handing them to you, you take them and use them how you need to. Getting feedback from you about what you do need, and then being able to turn around and get that built down the road. So a very different model than what the training program has been doing for about the last 10 years. For you all, maybe this is a big change, maybe it's not. I think it depends a lot on how you're doing training inside your agency right now. If you're an agency that is sending everybody to NARA to get the KA certificate, there are going to be some changes with this, I think, for you. On the other hand, I think those are all good. I think it is an opportunity to really look at how do you get the right person the right training, rather than everybody gets the KA certificate and they may not have needed all of it, any of it, or part of it. So there's a lot more flexibility that's going to come with you. Again, and we're hoping to build this out so that a lot of this is improved over time, so that we're taking that input from you, right? So that we can mature what you actually need, when you need it, and how it comes to you. And again, providing that support to you. Example would be, we've already talked about how do we set up office hours for our trainers. So essentially you get on a webinar or a video conference, or maybe just a teleconference, and you're getting ready to do training tomorrow, you got questions about a particular thing, you know there's this set time on the schedule, I'll just call the trainer at NARA and find out what's going on with this particular thing. And again, we're in initial stages, a lot of these ideas about how it's going to play out. We'll be getting your feedback again along the way as we grow and proceed down the road to implementing this. So everyone needs goals. These are ours, right? This is what we are charging towards in the training program and what the large changes will look like. Again, that first bullet is really thinking about this transition from formal track training that we think about and we control on our end to how do we enable you to do the training better that's right for you. So we are only going to worry about what we are statutorily required to do, if you will. The Managing Government Records Directives, you all know, says agency records officers have to get your Certificate of Federal Records training from NARA. That's what we're going to track. That's who we are required to keep track of. Everything else that occurs will not be tracked by us. So it's going to get much more informal from our end, that then frees up resources to do the other work. Here's kind of our initial take of what we think our products and services are going to look like as we transition to this, right? We hope to be doing a lot more of these kind of short webinars, 30 minutes here, 60 minutes there, as a way that we can provide a rapid response to things that are in the environment. But we want to structure those so that we can then break them apart and filter them down into other products. So nobody's going to sit through a recording of 90 minutes in your agency. But if we have the first 15 minutes of something that says, this is John explaining metadata that's required for permanent transfer, well, now we can chop that apart and have it stand on its own. Maybe the next 15 minutes then is the technical aspect of how do you put that metadata into a Microsoft Word document. Someone might know metadata, but needs the technical piece. Again, structuring these so they feed down the line. On the services side, again, we're really thinking about how do we help enable you better. Whether that's designing and developing content along the way, doing consultations with you about how these things fit together in your agency, or possibly getting to a place where we can actually build more things specific for agencies that are unique to your needs. One of the neat things that came out of our team as we were talking about all this was this idea of, if you've seen them, meal kits that you can purchase, right? Well, one of the things that's going to happen is we've got all this material. We're going to put it up on an online catalog for you all, and you're going to go searching, trying to figure out what's there, how do I use it, and how does it fit together. So one of the things we identified was we've got to help you figure out how to put these things together when you want to go build training in your agency using this stuff. So we'll have a lot of things online. The key will be then us trying to help you figure out if you want to train people on 5 topics, which of these things do you really need to use, right? You might go find a couple of them on your own. You'll be able to come back and work with us, and we'll tell you, oh, the piece you're missing, in this case, happened to be this video that's on YouTube over here, right? That's the best thing for your solution. So the idea of how you fit all these pieces together will be important down the road. As you saw on those earlier screens, we've got lots of little things we're building right now, right? Sometimes we think of them as Lego blocks. So we're building little short Lego blocks. The question is, how do you pull the right Lego blocks to fit the thing you're building for training your folks in the right way? And we want to be a part of helping you get that done. Again, some things that are coming in your the training materials, no surprises here. But the first thing we'll put up online will be all the knowledge area course materials. So those will be available once we get things built out. We've also got an all-hands lesson that will be coming. Some of our initial e-learning things we've been doing in the last couple of years with Capstone, the Sustainable Formats course, all of that will be available, and all the source files. So let's say you say the Capstone training works for you, but you need to add something to it that's specific to your agency. You can work with whoever does e-learning in your agency, grab that source file, tag what you want on the end, or go make those changes, right? So it's not necessarily just about taking what we give you, but having the flexibility to adapt it to the way that it best meets your needs and working with you to do that. This initial catalog, the idea, is a big deal, a big thing for us, right? We certainly recognize that for this to work, we've got to put information and make it available in a way that makes sense for you. So we've started working with our web team to look at the data we have and how do we organize and structure it, potentially to turn it into a catalog on archives.gov. This is just an initial mock-up of one idea of thinking through how might you all use this? How might you want to have this information organized? What are the resources that would go in different places? As we get a little bit farther into this, we're going to be coming back to a lot of you to say, okay, we've built some test things. Can you look at it and tell us what works, what doesn't work? How would you like to see this be different? Again, the catalog is only going to be useful if it works for you all. And we recognize that, so we want to have you involved as we build that out and work towards getting everything available for you. So let's talk a little bit about timeline. Obviously, this is not something that's going to occur overnight, but we are looking at trying to phase this over roughly the next 18 months. So to get there, in 2019, we're going to make some initial changes. Training will be free for 2019. To do that, we're going to have to cap what we offer, right? So essentially what I'm trying to do is get to a fixed resource level that we can plan for 2019. The way we've been doing things is we do all the training we physically can with the people we have, and we add to our calendar throughout the year based on what you all asked for and what we hear. Not going to be able to do that when we start looking at this change. So important thing for 2019 is if you've got folks that you require to have the certificate because of your internal policy, know that there's going to be a limited capacity. If you have folks that are in field locations, limited capacity. And last, if you're an agency that has had us come to you, we're going to still try to do a little bit of that, but it's largely going to be whoever asks first. Because again, I've got to set what that resource level is ahead of time. So that's going to be the way we do that. And then our online courses, like the Basic Records Operations course, Sustainable Formats, we'll continue to run those roughly every month. Again, the difference now is they'll be free. So there's a place where we have a little bit more flexibility and capacity because we know we can get people in without a resource cost to us. But the face-to-face training, we've got to fix our capacity in 2019 to make sure that we can manage the actual cost for our end while we make it free to you. We'll continue with the pilots for the new curriculum. And again, we'll look at starting to build out this training catalog online so that you can begin to see how is this going to work for me, start grabbing things already and using them as they come up. Again, in 19, here's where we're planning the face-to-face courses. So again, I want to give you guys a heads up. Go think about where you have people around the country. Maybe get out ahead of this a little bit because the one challenge will be once the seats are filled someplace, that's going to be it for that particular location for the year. So if you have a lot of staff that you think are going to need trained in 2019, you might have to do some kind of strategic planning about who goes where when to get all of the seats that you need. So then 2020, this is where we're planning on finishing out this transition, right? So 2019, we roll back the knowledge area courses, ramp up our new courses. 2020 is where it all becomes the point of departure for us. So in October 2020, as things stand right now, we don't plan to do knowledge area courses anymore. The new curriculum should be ready to roll online. And at that point, the only people that we are going to worry about tracking training for and training are those designated agency records officers. So you're going to have to think about if you've been sending all your folks to the KAA courses, how do you transition to other training approaches for those folks that have traditionally done that, right? And last for us will be there's a whole lot of internal changes around our business processes, about how we set things up to do this work and get feedback that will be hopefully building in 19, ready to roll in 2020. A perfect example of that is what process are we going to use to get your demands for training? How do we find out what you need, put that in a pipeline to prioritize our investment every quarter or so and decide what are we going to build, and then make sure we have that communication loop back with you so that you can see what we've decided to do, what you requested that we maybe haven't gotten to yet, and again, have you as part of that process moving forward. So some pretty significant changes coming. Again, here's a shot of the timeline, key dates, right? So free is a good thing in 2019. We think we'll have some of the training catalog online at the latest sometime in January next year. That's our goal. Last KA courses will be next September as we shut those down. And then in 2019, October, we start doing all online. And again, we're only going to deliver formal training to records officers at that point. So let me see if I got this. I wanted to make sure that I covered the most important things for you, right? So why are we making this change? It's an opportunity, we think, to greatly increase the reach of the program without increasing resources, and it removes some of the most significant barriers to training that we've heard from you over the years. Who's going to be able to get that certificate after October 2019? SAORM designated records officers, right? So we are no longer going to worry about getting a certificate to the other 3,750 people that we train every year, right? So a much smaller audience that we were about. All the training materials that we build and produce will be available online, so you can go grab them, right? And most importantly, you're not on your own. As we do this transition, we'll be standing up a capacity to help you use this stuff, to help you figure out what do I need to do for training different groups? What do we have? What maybe could we get built? Again, working with you as we work through this to make sure that we become far more responsive to your training needs in a way that makes sense for you getting the right training to the right people in your agency at the right time. So then the question is, what didn't I get for you? So I'll turn it over to you all now to try to answer your questions or see what concerns you have about this change.
I'm Susan O'Brien with the Social Security Administration. Nice to see you, Gary. Thank you for all the information. So the one thing I noticed on the screenshot of your online training and the categories was you went right from records officer down to liaison. And I think at least Social Security with a big agency and probably others have sort of records management analysts that support the AROs. So I was wondering if you've thought about that other sort of in-between category. And on top of that, in addition to the ARO, we also have people that are really the designated backup ARO or, for succession planning and stuff. And would those folks be eligible to take the certification ARO class?
Right, so two great questions. So the first one, we haven't spent a lot of time trying to diagnose the differences in staff structure around all the agencies. So what we've tried to do in our approach to the new curriculum is have it be largely task-based. So ideally, you'll be able to see, here's all this task list, and we might have thought this is a task for a records officer that you now say is your records analyst. Well, down the road, it's not going to matter because you can go grab those training materials for that task and do whatever you need to do with that audience for them. So it gives you flexibility based on how you're structured. The backup for the records officers is something I think we've got to think through and talk about. We haven't gotten that deep into it. My initial reaction to it is I would see that probably as something that I would charge the agency to do. You'll have access to all the materials. You can do that training with them. And then if a point comes where they need to transition from a backup into the formal role, well then hopefully all they're doing is coming to us and taking a test and saying, I already learned all this stuff, I don't need the training. Okay, if you can prove that you can master the course content, no need for training, pass the test, get your certificate.
I did have one more
Yep.
question about just the access to the agencies for material. Have you thought about, all the agencies are charged with doing annual training for all employees. And right now I see we do it ourselves. We come up with the content, based on the guidance from NARA. But is there any thought or have you done anything to kind of put together some sort of all agency employee, like an annual training?
So we've got two things. Years ago, we worked with the FRON to build an initial one. That was prior to us publishing the bulletin on what was required. So that's available. And then the second piece is we've built a face-to-face lesson that includes placeholders for what's agency specific in that outline of what had to be in it. We haven't made that widely available. If you want that, email me. I will get that to you. That's one of the things that we will be putting up as we build the catalog. Absolutely. Okay. We'll get the mic over into the middle here first. Got it? Excellent, sir. Thank you.
How about refresh? You have people that are pretty trained in records management, but you have new materials there. How does that work?
So I think that is, again, a place where we're going to rely largely on you to say, what do your people need, right? At the agency records officer that is required to get our training, one of the things we've been talking about for a couple of years now is a renewal requirement. So instead of just getting your certificate and never doing anything, periodically we're going to ask you to come back and renew that certificate. Our initial conversations right now, again, thinking about how do we put all this together, look like that's probably going to be some kind of test. So you take an online test. If the policy changes or practice changes that we've put into training in the last 3 years, you can pass that test. You got them all, you're done. If not, then we're probably going to have you do some online training, self-paced, take the test again until you get that. So the renewal for the records officers we see as our responsibility. Any kind of renewal for the rest of your records management program workforce we see as enabling by giving you the flexibility to pick and choose what you want to use for your folks based on your needs. Okay, what else?
Good morning. Hey, Gary. Sorry, let me interject one from online. Okay, Ann Mills from NASA wants to know if you have considered creating a way for records officers or field center managers to review the training before they ask their record liaison officers to actually engage in it.
Well, this is going to be the beauty of this, right? Everything we build is going to be on archives.gov. You're going to be able to pull and look at whatever you want before you tell anybody else to touch it. We're hoping to be able to actually have some of it run right from there. But if not, you'll be able to download those e-learning packages, put them in your LMS. So that's going to be completely available to you. All right. And I'm going to try to take one or two more and then make sure we have enough time for our last presenter.
Good morning, Lynette from CMS. The people that have taken the certification that are not the records officers, will our certification no longer be valid after that, or will we still be able to keep our certification and be able to renew it?
Great question that I don't have an answer to yet. So my initial reaction is, again, thinking about how we're framing this for us, it probably doesn't matter to NARA. So I think this is someplace where we've got to talk to you all more and understand what are the options there. One possibility is we may be able to facilitate you renewing your certificate in your agency with within your own agency, right? So we've got to look at that down the road. Again, a lot of details to work out here. We've thought about a lot of things. That's one that we've got to work towards down the road, certainly. All right, one more. If there are any more.
I've got one here, Gary.
Okay, Jim.
So Shantae Sawyers from the Census says, since you're going to create training for custodians and liaisons, will there be an element created for performance plans to increase accountability?
I don't see that as our responsibility, per se. I would encourage you to do it. I will tell you, when I walked into NARA 4 years ago, I was a little bit surprised as a training guy to find on my performance plan an element for records management. So I think it's important for you to do. We're not going to be in the business from the training program of telling agencies how to write their performance plans and what to put in them. Certainly, I think if you have questions about that, I'd encourage you to reach out to our staff, though, and I'm sure we can help you with that and make suggestions. But that is largely your agency's business, not NARA's, to worry about your performance plans. So thank you all for your attention this morning. If you have other questions, by all means, email me, comments, that'd be great. And I'm gonna pop in at 1 with the appraisal group, so we'll try to get some questions answered there if you're sticking around and have time. So thank you all. Hope you have a great day.
Thank you, Gary. As always, putting the rest of us up here on the stage to shame, with, of course, the exception of Susan Little, did a wonderful job earlier today. So our last piece today, I'm going to invite up to the podium John McAvoy with special guest Rebecca Servi from the Department of Justice to talk about the customer portal disposal module.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to see everybody again. I've got some really great news for you regarding the ARCIS customer portal. The acronym of this, of course, that I'll refer to the entire time is CPDM. Whoops, I did what Lawrence did. What do I do here? Well, that's the end of that show. No, I'm kidding. We'll try it this way. There we go. I'll cut right to the chase here since we're a little short on time. The great news is that at long last, the customer portal disposal module, CPDM, will finally be deployed on October 1st for the January 1st disposal date notices. We've worked long and hard on further developments and modifications. I've got a lot of information about that in my presentation this morning. My rollout plan as of right now is to set up some webinar or web conferencing scenarios so I can introduce everybody in the records management community to the customer portal disposal module, whereby you can then go back, talk about it, and make a qualified decision if you really think that CPDM will be of benefit to your agency. I think you'll find that it will. There's a lot of good things about it that I think you'll really like that I'll talk about. But in order for me to deploy this in a timely manner, we do need to have you signed up for it by August 1st of this year. So look for my introduction web conferences that I'll send out to all the super administrators, and I'll also work with our account management team to get the word out to everybody so people can participate. But once I know you're going to sign up, you're going to sign up. We'll have a brief setup meeting. Of course, I'll still let you out of the commitment if you need to. Won't take very long. We just have to ask you a few questions as to whom you want your disposal notices to be transmitted. And then lastly, you have to be, for those agencies who aren't yet deployed on ARCIS 2.0, There's still time. Please contact me at your earliest convenience and we'll get you deployed on 2.0. But for the rest of the agencies, you're already on board, and probably the most important thing that you need to realize about using CPDM is the fact that if you go with CPDM, you have to use it exclusively. We can't do a hybrid of paper notices to this entity, a spreadsheet of other notices to another entity, and a piece of your agency using CPDM. It is an all-in proposition for it, but again, I think you'll really like it. In regards to training, I have some training materials developed. They were kind of a quickie manual that I put together for certain aspects of CPDM for our pilot agencies that tested the system live over the last 6 months. And then once I get the final enhancements completed to CPDM, then I'll come back down here to the studio and record my training videos for you. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about CPDM today, what it is, how it's been rolled out and been used the last 6 months. Probably the beauty of CPDM is the fact that online it gives you all the tools you need to make a qualified decision about a disposition decision. It provides for you all of the 13,001 information that you would find on the old paper form. The other enhancement to it is that it also shows you a copy of your scanned 135, the original that the FRC has. And if you added box lists, whether you did it through the customer portal or perhaps you asked the FRC to add a box list to your records transfer, that too will be visible for you as well. So we think we've given you all the tools you need to make a good decision on the disposition of a records transfer. One of the nice things about CPDM, and this of course will go forward with it, is the ability for you to query across all your disposition notices and then make groupings, or lots as we call them, of different dispositions or groupings of dispositions for your various entities that you may have in your agency. For small agencies, you won't need to do that. You can go in and approve or decline of your disposition notices individually. But for middle-sized to larger agencies, you're going to have different components that you need to send different batches to, and CPDM has that capability. It also allows for up to 2-person review where a simple agree or disagree decision is made with comments if necessary. And then ultimately you can route it from reviewer 1 to reviewer 2 and then ultimately to the person we call the final disposition approver, or FDA, and that's the person who makes the ultimate go or no-go on the destruction of a records transfer. There are a myriad of different ways that I won't get into as to how you can route these things, particularly once we get some of the enhancements that I have in store built by October. But I think we've tried to build it with as much flexibility as we can so that you can virtually paperclip a certain subset of disposal notices and send them along to various components and for their review and recommendation, and then ultimately to the FDA for final decision. A little bit about the acronyms. You'll hear me refer to disposal notices as DNs. The DA is the disposal approver. That person is the person who initially receives the DNs via the customer portal. That'll be very important for you agencies that say, yes, John, I certainly want to sign up for CPDM and use it. Your reviewers I refer to as R1 and R2. Reviewer 1 being the first person that you could pass along a lot of disposal notices to. Reviewer 2 being the second person, then ultimately we get to the FDA. All right, let's talk about the improvements by October 1st. This is the fun stuff, and I have all of our pilot agencies to thank for their recommendations, one of whom is here today, who will come up and provide her thoughts on her experience with the pilot of existing CPDM. The first one is multiple DA reassignment. The current version allows you to go into a disposal notice and change the DA to somebody else, one by one, individually. but we're going to build for you a component where you can select, query for and select a collection of disposal notices, and you can change the DA to a different person, and then the new DA starts the whole process with lotting or just simply making the decisions for the disposal notices themselves. Cosmetic change where it said, is it okay to dispose these, where we just had a yes or no. It was strongly recommended that we change it to okay to dispose and retain the records to provide a little bit more clarity on the decision that you are making on this particular records transfer. Per one of the CFR's listings, if retain the records is selected, we're going to populate through some logic that we're building in the background a suggested disposal date 1 year out. However, there are other different date combinations where perhaps you're late and well past the disposal date for stating that you're going to retain the records, where that will calculate a year out and perhaps another disposal quarter. You can change it. You'll be able to edit it to what you want, but of course that'll be subject to review by the T&D expert at the Records Center. One thing that we're going to unlock, this is being done for an agency that wants to QC some of their reviewers' work. So it used to be that a DA could not reselect him or herself as reviewer 2. And one agency that piloted this said, no, we have to have that because I want to QC what the reviewer recommends before we send it on to the FDA. So we're going to build that in there for you. After what I saw in the pilot, I thought a good idea would be to confirm the lot, or to build a confirm lot functionality. And what each reviewer has to do after going through all the individual disposal notices in a lot, after they're done, is hit confirm lot. And confirm lot then runs a validation job that makes sure that the reviewer did make a decision on each and every disposal notice. And if not, an error message will pop up, and it will notify them that they have more work to do within that lot before they complete it. And then once they successfully confirm the lot, then they'll be allowed to forward the lot to the next person down the line. Okay, other improvements. We're going to give you some lot maintenance capabilities. First and foremost, during the process of a lot being transferred from one person to another, things happen with personnel. We're going to give you the capability to change a reviewer or an FDA midstream. We're also going to give you the ability to cancel a lot. If a lot suddenly becomes incorrect and should be rerouted or broken up into other components, you'll be able to cancel the lot, and all of the disposal notices within that lot will go back to the land of unlotted DNs, where they can be reselected, relotted, and re-forwarded to other reviewers. So that's some of the improvements. But then we have, and its working name right now is John's Lot Garage. John's Lot Garage will have all of the things that I just mentioned, but it'll also be a little bit more robust. I wanted to make sure that our contractor built a module for me so that whatever goes wrong within a disposal notice situation, a lot situation, I'll be able to go in and fix these things. And of course, we'll train a backup for me too, so that somebody else will be available to do these things. But I wanted to make sure that as we go through the process, there was some remediation if you run into problems and say, John, I'm new to this, I goofed the whole thing up, can you please reset everything back to square one? And I'll be able to do that for you. Okay, so Department of Labor, DOJ, DLA, DFAS, and NARA itself piloted live the CPDM over the past 6 to 9 months with varying degrees of success, I'd say. For the most part, successful. However, all of those things that I just listed about what is to come and that our contractor is actively working on as we speak, those suggestions came from our pilots, and I really want to thank all of you out there for helping me in this endeavor so we can build you a good CPDM. But today I invited Rebecca Meservey of DOJ to come up here and provide her thoughts on on her experience with CPDM. And afterwards, I'll come back to the lectern. We'll do some questions and answers, and then we'll be able to close for the day. So at this time, I'd like to invite Rebecca to, oh, there you are, to come to the podium.
Thanks, John. Thank you, John. And I wanted to start by giving you a little bit of background about us, because that's relevant to how we've implemented it. The Department of Justice, we have a lot of components. We are not a small agency. We are a very large agency. We have a lot of components, and we rolled this out as a pilot to our offices, boards, and divisions components. So those are the components that are on the central national agreement that my office, our office, oversees. So our bureaus that have their own agency records officers and their own agreements are have not rolled out to this on this pilot. We have done the disposal modules for the last quarter. We did all of ours in this last quarter, and we're deep in the throes of this next upcoming quarter disposal notices. And we have been rolling them out to the components that have disposal notices for the quarter. So this last quarter, we only trained and worked with those that had disposal notices to review and to approve this last quarter. Another thing about our agency is that we have been very active in ARCIS from the very beginning. So our users are very used to ARCIS. They're very used to ARCIS 2.0. We started with the reference functionality. When the transfer functionality moved on board, we got our users. We've been with ARCIS 2.0 pretty much from the very beginning. And that, I think, has helped. They know some of the quirks of ARCIS. They know some of the things that to be on the lookout for, and that's helped with our rollout. With that said, we have loved the disposal module. We have some things that we've had to do to make it work for us, but we've really loved some of the things that it has done for us. It has made it a lot easier to track disposal notices. So we used to get those paper notices. We'd send them out to components to have them review them, to send them back to us to look at what they were. We didn't know which ones weren't coming back. We didn't know what that was. So then we switched to spreadsheets, because that allowed us at least to see what we were sending out and coming back, but it was still a lot of work, and it's still very hard to track. And in the disposal module, what are you calling it, John? CPDM? In the CPDM, we can see what's gone out to who, where it is in the process, who's returned their notices, who hasn't returned their notices, what reviewer it's got stuck on. That has been extremely helpful to us. And we also really, really, really love the fact that it shows us everything about the transfer. It gives us the scanned version of the SF-135 and the box lists. It saves our folks who are reviewing it from having to go and find that stuff in their own files, in their own stuff, and pull that back. It's extra work that they're having to do that CPDM makes it so we don't have to do that. We only have to do it if there's a question or there's a concern or the scanned stuff didn't give us enough, then we have to go in. So we really love having that. And we found in this last version, it also was able to show us where the Record Center had scanned documentation about a previous refusal or request to retain the records. It showed us. I could immediately identify which transfers that had happened, and it gave us some information about other holdings maintenance activities that we could take. Hey, we've refused this once before. What is the reason? Why do we need to continue maintaining this? Is there a schedule? Is there something else? What do we need to do to clean this up in our Record Center holdings? So that was really helpful. Those are the helpful things. The quirks to be aware of that we've noticed is that just like ARCIS in other aspects is that there are some steps, and you have to get used to the right order of the right steps. And if you don't follow that right order, it kind of gets a little funky, technical term. But once you get used to that order, and once you're used to the different steps, it works very smoothly. So it took us a little while, and it's taken us a bit to train people, to get people used to what that step is. There were a couple times when I had to call John and say, why isn't it doing this? Oh, you forgot to push that extra button. Oh, okay, now it works. So we had some of that. There's a few things in there that are you have to be aware of when it says concur versus approved disposal. Concurring means you concur with a lot, and so you have to be aware of what the different terms are and what they mean. Once you get used to it, once you understand what each step does, then it moves forward pretty quickly and pretty smoothly. The last 2 points that I found are things that we had to do to make it work for us is, as John noticed, there's no notifications that the system sends. So we had to be very careful about telling people, when your reviewer 1 is done, you need to email or send something to reviewer 2 and say, hey, it's in your queue now. go do it. And so we had to remind people a couple different times to do that. Once they remembered, once they were aware of that, then it was okay. And in some cases, I had to go in and look at where it was and say, hey, it's been sitting with reviewer 1 for a while, send it out. The week before this is all due, I say, wait, why is this still sitting in reviewer 1's queue? Once they got a nudge, then they said, oh yeah, I can move it on and send it on to the next person. And then for us, the biggest fixes, the best things that we have on John's list of things to come is certainly the ability to change, to reassign. That was the one thing that we did not use it fully, as fully as we would have liked to, because we thought, what happens if someone leaves in the middle of the quarter? We have staff leaving all the time, records liaisons, they turn over. So we had to be careful to not assign reviewers if we didn't know that they were going to stay. So having that capability will allow us to use the system even more fully to do the things we did. But even with those things, we were still really happy with the module. It worked for us quite well, and we're moving forward with this next quarter. We don't want to go back at this point. So, and with that, I'll turn it back over to John. I'm happy to answer questions about how we found it.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was awesome. Speaking of the communications piece of this thing, there's still hope. Unfortunately for this year, we were a little bit limited on what we could build, how much of it we could build, and unfortunately the poor communications module, which is going to reach across records transfers, reference requests, and now of course CPDM, it's so vast that there was just no way we could build that and include that into it. So yes, unfortunately you'll have to pick up the phone, send an email to the next person down the line to let them know that a lot has been forwarded to them. And I apologize for that, but hopefully we will get that accomplished. So now, any questions out there that I can answer for people?
So John, will CPDM have reporting capabilities for the agency ARCIS super administrator and administrators, or at least a way to export disposal information to a spreadsheet that can be sent to the original or successor office of the record creator?
Good question. Unfortunately, the reporting capability is still pretty minimal via the customer portal. That said, of course, I think everybody would recognize that I'm pretty quick to produce whatever report you need, so I can provide supplemental reports as needed, and happy to do that. There is the one report that you will be able to get out of CPDM is an actual 13,001. If you need to print the paper for a disposal notice, you will be able to do that. But in terms of exporting and creating a spreadsheet of all your disposal notices, we do not have that at this time, nor is it planned.
Can I add?
Yeah, sure.
Can I add, John, that the search functionality is pretty good. We've been using the search functionality a lot to group our disposal notices in the way that our components need. So some components, it's fine to group all of the disposal notices for the one component in one lot and send it on, but we also have the ability, and we have been doing, where if one component knows that they've got a section or different aspects that need them grouped separately, we've been able to do that using the query functionality with disposition authorities or other query terms that allow us to subgroup some of those lots.
Okay. Other questions? All right, thank you for your time. Oh, there's one. Wait.
I'm Bill McClements with MSPB. I have two questions. The first, is there like a category for like litigation hold built into the system? And also, having reviewers seems like kind of complicated. I'm wondering if it might be easier just to have a final approver of the disposition.
Sure. Litigation hold is still a drop-down selection item from a list of values, so litigation hold will still be there. And secondly, we built enough flexibility in CPDM so that if you are the DA, you can go in and just make the decision as the DA. You don't have to forward it to yourself as the FDA. You can just go in and make that decision. Or You can send it from DA to R1 to FDA, DA to R1 to R2 to FDA, or DA to new DA, and then all of those combinations all over again. So there's a lot of flexibility with the sending of lists of disposition notices to different people. So I tried to build as much flexibility as I could.
John, we have another question.
Sure.
Lynette again from CMS.
Hi.
This is for Rebecca, I think.
Nope.
With the components, did you have everyone in ARCIS as a user in order to have them as the reviewers or the disposition approvers? Did you put everyone from all the components in there?
So yes and no. Those who are serving as reviewers or as disposal, well, I'm the final disposal approver, but those that are serving as reviewers, they all have ARCIS accounts. And those are usually the kinds of people that they're already sending transfers. So like I said, we've been on ARCIS 2.0 for a while, so those are the people who've been sending the transfers, who've been doing things. So there were very few that we had to add users, but we did have to go in and make sure that they had disposal capabilities for those that already had ARCIS accounts. And for those that might not have, we did have to work with them to get them, to set them up in ARCIS.
Okay, and just to back up with John, so can you put in people as disposal only and not, they can do transfer?
Great question. Yes, you can. So most of the components for being able to use CPDM are individual capabilities that you need to add as a user administrator in ARCIS. There's a capability for Reviewer 1, for Reviewer 2, for FDA, and then similar to like records transfers, what it is that you can do within CPDM. Can you just look at disposal notices, or can you actually go in and make decisions upon them? So we'll have all of that available when I get the training materials available. Anything else? All right, well, this is great. Thank you very much for your time. We'll be in touch.
So thank you all. Before we rush off to lunch, I want to thank all of our excellent presenters today, Kyle, Susan, Gary, and of course Rebecca and John you just heard from. I think it's been a great meeting, a lot of information and a lot of things to think about. We will meet again on June 28th. And we wanted to remind everyone again, since it was 2 hours that I said this, that the records management satisfaction survey is going to be out. Please look for that. If you don't see it, you might want to check your spam folders just to make sure it makes it your way. And if you don't see it, please get in touch with us through the listserv, RM Communications, and we'll make sure that we'll get it out to you. So with that, we'll adjourn and see you back here in June. Thank you all for coming.